Good morning, everybody. If you're on the call with me and you can hear me, can you give me a thumbs up? Perfect. I am going to go ahead and get started. So, welcome to the WTF class for the Binsr. If you're not familiar with the acronym, I'm assuming you're all familiar with the acronym. If you're not familiar with how I use it, it's what's that form? The Binsr is one of my favorite forms to cover because it's so nuanced. But with that comes a lot of difficulty with making sure everybody is doing it correctly. And there are definitely ways to do it correctly. So we're going to go through those today. So we will take up the whole hour just discussing this one document. A couple of ground rules. Please keep yourself on mute unless you're asking a question, but please do ask your questions out loud. Just it's tough for me to monitor the slides and my presentation and the chat all at the same time. So please do just go ahead, unmute yourself, ask the questions for the good of the group. And then you don't have to worry about notes. I will send out the slide deck and a link to the class recording to everyone who registered after the class sometime later today once Zoom finishes the recording portion. To kind of preface this, I think so many of our Binsr issues could be resolved by proactively addressing some of the concerns that a buyer would likely have. So this is just a sample script for consideration. You can do many things with it, including throwing in a couple of sample repairs that are very common. For those of us who have been doing this for a hot minute, almost every home seems to have the cracked roof tiles or the connection for the high loop on the dishwasher or any number of things. We just see them all the time on reports, right? So I think kind of putting some of those things out there will help make the buyer more comfortable. But one of the things before the inspection ever occurs, prepare the buyers, especially first time home buyers, because those reports can be overwhelming. So I would tell them be prepared to see 60 to 80 pages of inspection items and suggestions for corrections. Keep in mind that an inspector is paid to find things. Don't worry, the house is not falling apart. Now, don't say that little last bit if ultimately they are buying a total fixer upper and the house is falling apart and there are substantial repairs needed. Just a little CYA. But typically speaking, the house is not falling apart. We will meet with the inspector for an inspection recap, at which time you can ask him or her for the items they think are most critical and or costly. So again, just a little CYA. You are not a contractor. Even if you are not operating as a contractor in this particular capacity for this transaction. So make sure that you're kind of putting the onus on the inspector. That buyer talked to the inspector, come up with that list of 5 to 7 items that they think are most critical that they would ask for on their own home. And usually it is because of safety concerns or it's just a costly fix or something similar. And then the final part, like I mentioned, typically we will create a list of 5 to 7 items to ask the seller to repair. This is not set in stone. What I'm trying to do is get them to put in their minds that we are not going to ask for every single item on the inspection report, because all that's going to do is piss off the sellers, and in turn, they will likely just turn down all repairs. They're going to think that that's a ridiculous request. And so they're going to tell you, okay, well, take a hike. We don't want to deal with you anymore. So again, this is just a proactive approach to try to eliminate some of those concerns and objections for the buyer before we even get to the inspection. And I do think that this will save many of you from some heartache down the road. All right, let's go into just kind of testing some basic knowledge here. I'll have a poll up for you. So, several true or false. True or false, a buyer may request a monetary credit in lieu of repairs on page 1 of the Binsr. True or false, a seller may respond with a monetary credit in lieu of repairs on page 3 of the Binsr. True or false, if a buyer rejects the premises on page 1 of the Binsr, they must provide a reason for rejection, aka disapproved items. True or false, a buyer through their agent is to deliver a copy of the inspection report to the seller at the same time they submit the Binsr to the seller. True or false, the buyer requesting on the Binsr that the seller have an HVAC technician evaluate the AC unit and make any necessary repairs is a valid request. Okay, I'll give you a couple of minutes to go ahead and answer those. 20 seconds. All right, 90% participation. Not bad, not bad. Let's go ahead and share some of these results. All right, so true or false, a buyer may request a monetary credit in lieu of repairs on page one of the Binsr. As of 2022, that is true. So once upon a time, again, for those of us who have been in the business for a little while, this was considered a no-no. But now by handling it properly, this is allowed, and we will go through that today. True or false, a seller may respond with a monetary credit in lieu of repairs on page three of the Binsr. That is also true. That is not a problem at all. And quite honestly, that hasn't ever been an issue. It just may have to be handled a certain way, which again, we will cover by providing an addendum for the Binsr and the title company, or for the lender and the title company for the Binsr. True or false? If a buyer rejects the premises on page one of the Binsr, they must provide a reason for rejection, aka disapproved items. This is true. So they can't just mark the box and leave those bottom lines blank. They have to provide a reason. Now, the silly part of this is if they don't provide a reason, then the seller has to issue a cure notice for them to provide a reason, thereby giving them 3 more days to come up with a reason to have canceled in the first place. So, generally speaking, I think that this just kind of we just let it pass if there's nothing written into the Binsr when they reject the premises. However, they should, per the contract, provide a reason. True or false, a buyer through their agent is to deliver a copy of the inspection report to the seller at the same time they submit the Binsr to the seller. That's actually false, but maybe a little bit of a tricky question. You are to provide a copy of the inspection report, all inspection reports, upon receipt. So you should be sending those over as soon as you receive them from the respective inspectors, not submitting it over with the Binsr. However, that does seem to be the most common practice, so just know it's not right. True or false? The buyer requesting on the Binsr that the seller have an HVAC technician evaluate the AC unit and make any necessary repairs is a valid request. That is false. It is the buyer's responsibility to conduct any desired inspections, evaluations, etc., and then ask for repairs. It is not the seller's responsibility to conduct inspections or evaluations on the buyer's behalf. So we'll go through that in a little more detail, but that one is false, and that's probably one of the biggest issues I am seeing with Binsrs right now. All right, so getting right into it, page 1 of 3, residential buyer's inspection notice and seller's response, also known as the Binsr. Please make sure that you don't inadvertently use the commercial buyer's inspection notice and seller's response. It does happen periodically. Just double check and make sure it starts with residential, and that the October 2022 one is the appropriate version. So please make sure you're using that. All of the contract information at the top, the seller, the buyer, the address. And then it goes into this big bold section. Buyer inspections and investigations completed. Now, what they are referencing here is simply a reiteration of what the buyer signed in the purchase contract. So that's why it says see section 6J. So section 6J already went through all of this, but these are little reminders for the buyer. Buyer has completed all desired inspection items, such as physical, environmental, and other inspections and investigations, inquiries and consultations with government agencies, lenders, insurance agents, architects, and other persons and entities. That insurance agent is a big one because I think many of us forget that that needs to be done. Homeowners insurance needs to be done during their due diligence period. And so many agents and buyers don't even think about it or do anything with it until the very end, where their lender says, hey, we need a copy of your homeowner's insurance so that we can finish your loan. This is a problem if all of a sudden they need flood insurance or they can't obtain insurance or it's way higher cost than they were expecting. So please make sure your buyers are aware that they need to secure their homeowner's insurance during their 10-day due diligence period. And that's what that little 10 days is off to the side. So assuming you have not modified the timelines on the standard purchase contract, the buyer has 10 days to conduct all of these inspections. Investigations of applicable building, zoning, fire, health, and safety codes, inquiries regarding sex offenders and the occurrence of a disease, natural death, suicide, homicide, or other crime on the premises or in the vicinity, inspections and investigations pertaining to square footage, wood destroying organisms or insects, sewer, flood hazards, swimming pool barriers, and insurance, and inspections and investigations of any other items important to buyer. The square footage one is kind of interesting. So oftentimes you may notice that there's a difference between what is being reflected in the MLS versus what is in tax records. And sometimes it's easy to find out why. And we have a copy of a previous appraisal, or we've had the house measured or something similar. But we did have a case where the property still appraised, but the appraiser found that it was actually about 300 square feet smaller than what was marketed. And it wasn't, other than there was a misinformation provided in public records. That's all that we could figure out. Um, but the buyers were extremely irritated and they attempted to cancel based on the fact that the square footage was less. Now, the problem is, this is irritating to me. You walked through that house, I don't know how many times. This was way past their inspection period because, again, this wasn't discovered until the appraisal. You've had no problems with the house, the layout, the size so far. But all of a sudden, an appraiser says, hey, you actually have 300 square feet less, and now it's a problem for you. Now, they're probably thinking, future, this could affect our future valuation for our property. But again, if that was a concern to them, they needed to have the house measured during their due diligence period. So they did not have a leg to stand on at the time of appraisal for that reason. Buyer has verified all information deemed important, including the MLS or listing information. Okay, so we often say that MLS information is FYI only, it's not guaranteed or promised. So any information contained therein does need to be examined, investigated by the buyer, and all other information obtained regarding the premises. Buyer acknowledges that all desired inspection period inspections and investigations must be completed prior to delivering this notice to seller. I have a little apple image off to the side. Okay, so in legal jargon, you'll often hear from AAR that they get one bite at the apple. Okay, that means that they get one shot, one opportunity to submit their Binsr. So they need to make sure that they have completed all of their inspections and investigations prior to doing so. Strategically, this is probably wise for them to wait until day 9 or 10 to submit the Binsr, just in case anything pops up during that time. Um, I know listing agents on here are going to get frustrated and say, no, 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 get it sent over as soon as possible. Let's get working on this. Of course, don't do anything that's going to delay closing, but that means that you should have modified your timelines in advance if using your full 10 days could potentially hinder closing. But with this, absolutely, I want my buyers to be sure that they are fully comfortable moving forward. So even if I did the inspection, the typical home inspection on day 2, that doesn't mean I'm going to submit the Binsr on day 2 or 3. I would let them have their time so they can really go through the buyer advisory. They can drive through the neighborhood at multiple times of the day and night. They can ask neighbors questions if they want. They can consult with their homeowner's insurance. All of these things that they should be doing, I want to make sure that they have the time to do it and we don't cut them short. All inspection period items disapproved must be provided in this notice. Buyer's election is limited to the options specified below, and buyer is not entitled to change or modify buyer's election after this notice is delivered to seller. So there's a lot within that. So again, this is why take your 10 days when you have the buyer, because once they submit the Binsr, there's no turning back. They can't decide after that, okay, well, I'm just going to cancel. They can't rescind the Binsr and resubmit a new one. They can't add items to the Binsr that they've already sent over. Okay, it's one shot that they get on this. So please make sure they are aware. Additionally, this is very often, I hear this and I don't know where this came from. The Binsr was submitted on day 4, and the buyer and the agent decide, oh, we need to add something. So aside from the clearly violating what we've just gone through, the second part to this is like, but we have a 10-day inspection period. No, you had a 10-day inspection period. However, you elected to submit the Binsr on day 4. So your inspection period was 4 days because you cut it short. Okay, you don't have this extended period of time after the Binsr is submitted. It is 10 days or whenever the Binsr is submitted, whatever happens first. Sylvia, I think I saw your hand up. Did you have a question?
So, yeah, I did because I did go through this with one of my listings where the buyer we didn't know when I listed it, we didn't know that it was in a flood zone because it became a flood zone later, like 3 months later. And so during the buyer inspection period, they didn't know that it was in a flood zone until their time was up. And later on, closer to closing time, it was their lender that found out that it was in a flood zone. So truly, like, they had already gone over their 10 days, so they kept extending it, extending it, extending it, and just made this way longer than it needed to be. But so was that like a different case, or is it the same? They should have found it out during this time.
That's a potentially different case because it sounds like there were some other issues within that. So if it was clearly marked as a floodplain during their inspection period, so this may require some investigating to determine when that was notated in monsoon or on county records. As soon as they found that out, and had they actually consulted with their homeowner's insurance during their 10-day inspection period, if it wasn't showing up on public records and they had consulted and it wasn't popping up with their homeowner's insurance, then later on down the road, in essence, that becomes an update to the seller disclosures. That's an update to the SPUDs. And for
Okay,
that reason, they would be able to cancel and get their earnest money back if they do so within 5 days of finding out that information. But if they
okay,
bypass that front end, if they didn't do their due diligence on the front end, then in my opinion, they would not be entitled to their earnest money back if they tried to cancel for that reason.
okay.
Great question. Anybody else? Okay, so we all understand one shot, we're going to submit one Binsr. And no, you don't have 10 days if you submitted it at day 4. You're done. Your inspection period is officially over. So, again, be strategic with that with your buyers. And then there's a couple of extra little reminders on here. Buyer and seller acknowledge that any agreed upon corrections repairs must be performed in a workmanlike manner, which is very hard to define, by the way. We just kind of say you'll know it when you see it. And Arizona law ARS 321121 requires that a licensed contractor perform corrections repairs for which the aggregate contract price, including labor and materials, is $1,000 or greater, or the work to be performed is not of a casual or minor nature, or the work to be performed requires a local building permit. I cannot tell you the number of times I have seen invoices come in at the end of the deal prior to closing, and it's a $2,200 bill payable for a single item that was fixed, like an HVAC unit, to a non licensed person. This is a problem. So please make sure that your sellers are aware that these are their responsibilities during upon agreeing to make repairs and then during the contract term. They have to be sure that they're abiding by this. And again, that goes further than just our contract. It's superseded by state law. So it's a serious issue. All right, the second part of page 1 and then moving into page 2 is buyer elects as follows. Okay, so these are the 3 choices that the buyer has. Premises accepted. No corrections requested. Buyer accepts the premises in its present condition and no corrections or repairs are requested. Okay, they're taking it. We're good. We're done. If they choose that box, then they're going to sign and the Binsr is done. The seller doesn't need to sign an acknowledgement, nothing else. As soon as they accept the premises, we're done and that's it. Premises rejected. Buyer disapproves of the items listed below and elects to immediately cancel the contract. In case you forgot that you had to provide a reason or items disapproved, it actually reminds you right here on the form. Same situation. If buyer rejects the premises, they're going to mark the box. They will list their item or items disapproved. For the love of all that's holy, if they are just so fed up with the entire inspection report, please don't list 47 items that they disapprove of. Just write a couple. It doesn't have to be every single thing. You don't have to create a novel about it. Just write a couple. They disapprove of the condition of the roof. That is sufficient. And then move on and have them sign. So, same thing in that situation. Only the buyer signs. It's signed just that once. The Binsr is done. The most common, however, is going to be box 3. Buyer elects to provide seller an opportunity to correct or address the disapproved items listed below, attach an addendum if applicable. So this is the part that changed in 2022 when they updated the Binsr, and it was or address. So correcting obviously indicates that they are going to make some sort of repairs. Address, however, opens this up to negotiate a little differently. So with that, this is what allows the buyer to ask for a credit in lieu of repairs. That used to be a no-no, that no, you can't use the Binsr to modify the contract, but apparently we've swayed a little more into, well, yes, technically you can, but this is how you do it. But you have to follow a very specific protocol for that to be valid. So please hear this. You cannot just mark that box and then say seller to credit buyer $1,500 at close of escrow. You cannot do that. Okay, that is an attempt to modify the contract without handling the Binsr support part of that appropriately. So what you need to do is list the items disapproved first. So it could be they disapprove of the age and condition of the HVAC unit. There are issues with the plumbing or issues with the electrical. It could be any number of things, but you need to list the items of which they disapprove in concise language, please. Again, don't have some long narrative to get to the point. They disapprove of A, B, and C. And then you can write, in lieu of repairs or in lieu of making repairs, seller shall credit buyer X dollars at COE. Okay, items disapproved, and then in lieu of repairs, making that credit request is acceptable. Just asking for a credit out the gate is not. So please understand that distinction. However, like I said, with the addition of the or address to the Binsr, you now may request a credit from the buyer side. If you do so, and especially if there is a loan involved, also go ahead and attach an addendum when you send over the Binsr. However, on the addendum, all you need to say is seller shall credit buyer X dollars at COE. Don't say anything about the Binsr. Don't say anything about in lieu of repairs, or you're going to red flag the lender. All you are referencing is the change to the contract, and the change to the contract is a credit in that dollar amount. When you do that, I would strongly recommend that you verify with the lender that the buyer can receive additional credits before you handle the Binsr this way. Because if they cannot, you've just wasted this. Because it'll come to the next section where it will indicate, in essence, hey, you may not get some or all of the credit if you are not able to per your lender. And it is not the seller's responsibility to come up with a workaround for that. So please, please make sure you are verifying with the lender first that they can accept additional credits to any that they may already be getting in the contract. The other portion is what most of us do, and we actually list the items that we want the seller to repair. When you are doing this, several notes. One, do not just list numbers from the inspection report. I don't even, you want me to fix the number 2.4? What do you want me to do with that? So I have seen where it literally says items disapproved 1.3, 2.1, 3.6, no. When you are doing your Binsr, it should be done in such a way that a third party could look at the Binsr, look at the repair, and determine was it made accordingly without any other points of reference. That would be the goal. Now, certainly put a citation inside the request that references the inspection report number, just so that the seller or the listing agent or the contractor has a quick point of reference if they need a little more information. But that just means at the end of the request, you put in parentheses, like inspection number 2.1. So in an ideal world, this is what your request will look like. You will not copy and paste from the inspection report or the inspection summary. You will start all of your requests with the verb, okay? Repair, replace, correct. And then you will specify what it is that you want repaired, replaced, or corrected. So it may say, I'm going to use an example that I hate. Repair the 4 cracked roof tiles on the northwest portion of the roof. Parentheses, item 2.4. Okay, that is an ideal way to write it out. So if somebody else saw that, they would know, did you correct the 4 broken roof tiles on the northwest or southwest, whatever I said, side of the roof? That's all you need. You don't need to explain the temperature of the day or all of the additional notes or that this is standard maintenance or that you can use some sort of special adhesive to do this. Now, if it were roof tiles, personally, I think that's a stupid request to make. Houses have broken roof tiles in Arizona, unless the underlayment has been affected and there's some sort of leak present. I think that this is such a non-issue, and yet almost everybody seems to ask for it. In my opinion, this also does not need to be done by a licensed roofer unless there are so many of them that it's going to exceed the $1,000. But again, I guess that's somewhat discretionary. All that being said, while they do have adhesive and options for repairing cracked roof tiles, if it was me, if I really wanted to get that done correctly, I would say replace the broken roof tiles. But that's just one example. So same thing. One that I see very often, and this is where I think many of you, that sample that I gave in the poll about having the seller have an HVAC technician out to evaluate the system and then make any repairs that they find. Yeah, no, that's not valid. Your buyer should have an HVAC technician come out who is always going to be superior to a standard home inspector. They just have the right instruments for gauging things like the split temp differential that always seems to come in off. And honestly, a lot of that is because of the instrumentation being used is not the proper type to be used. But if you want kind of a generic solution for that, you could say service the HVAC unit to include, and then we know what a lot of those annual tune-ups include, right? It's going to be cleaning out the condenser or the coils, adding any freon/refrigerant that's necessary. So you can get a pretty good idea just by going to an HVAC website and finding, okay, what services are included in their typical annual tune-up. And you could go ahead and put all of those things down on here, but it has to be a specific repair. You have to know exactly what it is that you're asking for. You can't use vague and ambiguous terms and put the onus on the seller to figure out what's wrong. The buyer needs to do this. So with that in mind, I would definitely look at trying to get my standard home inspector out at this house as quickly as possible, like within a couple of days of contract acceptance, if possible. Because if they come back and they say, hey, there is some problems with the HVAC system or with the pool or with the roof or with the electrical, I still need time for my buyers to bring in experts then. At that point, that would be where they need to hire a roofer or a structural engineer or an HVAC technician. They need to bring in somebody else to better evaluate what the problem is so that I can ask for that specific repair. Questions?
Leah, yes.
Yes.
Hi, Leah. Let's say we do ask the seller to have the HVAC serviced, and when that happens, the serviceman finds something that's wrong.
So my first question would be, when you asked to have it serviced, did you specify what that servicing looked like?
No.
So rule number one, specify what that looks like, because some of what they may find would already be corrected by referencing. So that's why I give the example of flushing the system, cleaning the coils, those types of things, just because I know those are common things that have to be done. However, to your point, should something more major be discovered, this is where it becomes a little bit icky. That means now that that becomes a disclosure item for the seller. So that's going to be a different negotiation potentially right then and there. And by negotiation, I mean that the seller has an obligation to fix it if it wasn't already broken and it's more recently broken. It's going to be circumstantial. I don't know that I have a black and white answer for you, because timing is going to involve a lot of that. And was it something that could have been discovered or should have been discovered by the buyers during their due diligence is going to be the other part of that.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. I know some of these are not as black and white as we would like, so it really does involve the timing and the duties of the respective parties and what could or should have been found. So if you ever bump into kind of a weird issue like that, definitely reach out to me and we'll talk it through and figure out best course of action based on those circumstances. All right, I have, let's see. Oh, just a general question. Feel free to unmute yourself if you have an opinion on this. Is it acceptable to ask for cosmetic repairs?
Nope.
No.
I agree. Now that doesn't necessarily stop buyers from doing it, but I would agree that if you see it, cosmetic meaning you saw it when you walked through the house. So if that was of a concern to you, then you should have put it into the original purchase contract that you wanted the green shag carpet cleaned or removed or whatever it is that you wanted done with that hideous carpet. You don't wait until you're Binsr to do so, because in my opinion, the inspection period and the point of the Binsr is to have latent material defects. So things we otherwise would not have been aware of, to have those things repaired or replaced. It's not a time to ask for stupid nonsense that we should have included in the original offer up front. And the number one thing I see tied to this is professionally cleaning the house. I will hit you if I see that you wrote this into one of your Binsrs. One, I would love for somebody to define professionally cleaning the house for me. If you know me even a little bit, my definition of professionally cleaned is probably different than some other folks will be. But what does that mean? The inside and outside of all the appliances need to be cleaned out. All of the carpets, tile, and grout need to be steam cleaned. What does professionally cleaned mean? But I can't tell you the number of times that I see this on a Binsr. Seller to have home professionally cleaned prior to close of escrow. Does that mean by professionals, or I, as the seller, just need to do a reasonably decent job to make it look good? So aside from the fact that that is definitely cosmetic in nature, that is not something that I would ever encourage you to put on a Binsr. If there really is a concern for the buyer, then indicate that there are parts of the condition of the home that are not satisfactory to them, that they disapprove of, and ask for the credit instead. And then the buyer can have the house cleaned as they want it cleaned after closing. So there are ways to kind of circumvent that and disregard the cosmetic portion, but ultimately go ahead and still have that potentially taken care of for the buyer, again, if that's a concern to them. But no, I'm with those who said no, cosmetic issues do not belong on the Binsr.
Leah,
Yeah.
this might sound a little off, but can't they put that on the, I mean, if it's really that bad, because they're walking in the door, like you said, and I've heard of some people even canceling the contract because of it. And it's like, you just saw it. Why are you canceling it? That's not valid. But if it's that much of a concern, they want it, why can't they put it in the additional comments and say seller agrees to, and let the seller decide on the other end?
So are you referencing putting that in the additional terms of the purchase contract?
That's correct.
So that's fine, but again, I want you to define for me what professional cleaning looks like.
Well, they can detail it as in hire a company to come in and either vacuum or what, I mean, detailed. I'm a detailed person. I would, you know me, I could put 5 lines to detail something for something very small. But if they just describe what they're wanting, then that would alleviate any confusion.
I agree. So, because it's cosmetic in nature, we're in agreement. Like, hey, if you want that done, put it on the purchase contract. Don't put it on the Binsr. My concern is going to be even asking, even if you delineate it, Tanya, quite honestly, it's probably not going to be to the standard that the buyer was expecting when it comes time to close. And then we're going to have an issue, right? We're going to have an argument. So if cleaning a clean house and the way that they want it done really is a concern to the buyer, ask for a credit instead. Don't let the sellers take this on. Just ask the buyers to go, or tell the buyers to go ahead and ask for a credit so that they can have it cleaned to their satisfaction after closing.
Actually, that's a better option. I agree with you.
I have good ideas every now and then, not always, but sometimes they happen.
Hi, Laura.
Hello.
Question. So I hear you're saying that we can ask for repairs on the actual residential contract. Like, for example, I had a buyer and we looked at this home, and right off the bat, we can tell that the AC would, like the outside unit was very damaged. So they wanted me to ask for, obviously an AC replacement, like a new unit outside. And we didn't do it on the purchase contract because I didn't know you can do that. Now that I'm listening to you, like we could have done that like like since the beginning instead of arguing it like during the Binsr time.
Yeah, 100%. And especially a big ticket item like that. If you know that that's not going to function correctly or it's going to be a problem, 100% address it in the contract, because then you know we've already agreed to it and this isn't going to be something we have to haggle over down the road.
Okay, so I could have just put that in additional comments, like at the bottom of the residential purchase contract. Like how would you just say, oh, like the wording, what would it be like? Oh, to replace the whole unit outside. But you know, like sometimes they're like, oh, well, you can't just replace the unit outside. You have to replace the whole entire AC unit. So at that
Yeah.
point, go for the big one and say, hey, you know, if we're gonna accept this, like, I want to make sure that I have a brand new AC unit, like the whole entire thing.
Yeah, so realistically, I think if you indicate seller to replace, and this would be on line 344, or whatever lines you're in needing there for the additional terms, you could indicate to replace HVAC system. An HVAC system entails every part that's connected to that system in that unit.
Okay, well, that's good to know because when we got into like the Binsr and we asked for it, they said no. So, and that was a bummer because I'm like, I wish I would have known this, you know, then because I would have put that all into that one offer because they really loved the home, but the sellers didn't want to replace the whole unit. Like we asked them to replace the outside unit, but every time we asked the company, I even sent quotes. They're like, no, you can't just replace the outside unit. You have to replace the whole entire thing. So when we asked for the whole unit, they're like, no. My buyers were so bummed that they couldn't get it because the seller said no at that point.
Well, and that's a tough pill to swallow. So that's why, especially if you notice major items that are going to be a point of contention right away, absolutely put them in the contract. Because at this point now with the Binsr, they've spent money on inspections and potentially their appraisal already. So they've got money out and the seller's not going to be willing to do some of these things. If they knew then in advance, they may have decided, hey, that they weren't even going to submit an offer on the property or that they obviously weren't going to proceed. So it's definitely a good opportunity and a good time to do that if you know of things in advance.
Okay, okay, well, that's good to know, because I thought we couldn't ask for any repairs at all whatsoever on the purchase contract.
List them all out.
All right, thank you. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. Yeah, of course. A couple of other little things. Does the appraisal have to be done during the inspection period? It's a question. You can answer.
No.
No, it does not need to be. And honestly, in I would say the majority of cases, it won't be. The buyer may order the appraisal during the inspection period, but the likelihood of the appraiser actually getting out there, conducting the appraisal, submitting the results, getting the NOV back, or the valuation summary back through the underwriter, unlikely.
Leah,
yeah.
I'm sorry, in reference to that, there's an agent in our area that in her private remarks requires that the appraisal be ordered within the first 5 days.
Oh, I think that's super smart. I hope it's not just in the remarks. I'm hoping that she's ultimately countering with those terms as well. So we can't control when it's done, but we can certainly control when it's ordered.
Well, that's what I mean. The listing agent is requiring that the appraisal be ordered within the first 5 days after acceptance. And, you know, oftentimes the inspection isn't even done. So why should a buyer spend money for an inspection and have to pay for an appraisal when it may not go forward?
So I understand that from the buyer side, but from the listing side, she represents the seller. And I know how often appraisals can cause issues, that they may also cause the deal to fall apart and or they're causing delays in closing one or the other. So from her perspective, I think it is super smart to say, hey, you also need to order this. Your buyer saving $500 is not my problem. I want to make sure that we're doing everything we can on the front end to minimize the likelihood of this falling out too late. So I don't want to be off the market for 25 days because we waited through the entire inspection period before they even submitted the order for the appraisal. So I can see why a listing agent would do that. And I do think it's smart on their behalf. Now, whether or not the buyer accepts it, of course, is up to them.
What do you think is the chance of buyers willing to accept that if they see that on there?
Oh, I think you'd be shocked at how often they do, because when I've taught this class or similar classes in the past and I reference some helpful clauses, and that's one of them. I don't know if the buyers don't fully understand that that means they're going to be putting out extra money. But I would say 9 times out of 10, they accept it.
Really? Because
Yeah.
with my buyer clients, especially if they're like really short on money or doing down payment assistance, things like that,
Yeah.
to not order it till after our inspection period is over. Even if we end it early or if we get the 10 days or whatever it is, as soon as our inspection period is over and we negotiate the Binsr items and we come into an agreement, that's when I order it for them. Well, I tell the lender, okay, it's good for them to order. Because I don't.
And Cassie, yeah, I think that's the most common way to do things, honestly, if there wasn't some prescribed or pre-written agreement to the contrary. I would say that's the number one way that things are done. We complete the inspections and then we tell the lender, go ahead and order the appraisal now.
Yeah, so right now I'm dealing with a buyer from California, and their lender wanted me to order the appraisal like right as soon as we went under contract. I'm like, I'm sorry, but we don't do that here. There's no timeline. I'm like, I'm not gonna put my buyer into a risk of losing like their 10 days, you know, or something going wrong in the inspection period, and we already have the appraisal. They already paid for it's like what, $700 or something. I'm like, I don't want them to lose their money, just because you want to order. I'm like, I don't know how they do it in California. I'm sorry, but here we do it this way. So, and I don't know why he was so hesitant, like, oh, let's order it already. Like he was being pushy about it. I'm like, no, we're not. We're not gonna order until we're ready to order it, you know? I don't know
Same
how
kind of reason that sellers are concerned, that ultimately they want to be sure that they're not getting bumped up against a time frame where they can't find the right appraiser, or the reports are getting delayed, or if they have to combat it, that they have the time for that. So I think that this is really going to be a matter of who negotiates harder for it. And based on different circumstances, yeah, if I have a buyer who's in like a DPA program, I'm going to push even harder. They're just not going to move forward with the property if that's going to be a requirement.
Yeah. Okay.
One other consideration for handling that might be that you kind of meet in the middle. And by meet in the middle, I mean you have inspections done first, but that might mean reducing your inspection period. So maybe you cut it down to a 7-day inspection period and then a 2-day response time, so that way you're not bumping up. Because again, the whole purpose and the issue is that they're trying to alleviate last minute issues with a low appraisal, or with the appraisal period. They want to make sure that it's in on time. So that might be a meet in the middle, so the buyers aren't bypassing the house. You can still get inspections done first. You're just going to have to reduce some of those timelines.
And how about if it's a requirement of the listing agent and obviously the seller, because apparently the agent is supposed to be echoing what the seller wants, that we ask for the seller to pay for the appraisal?
You can certainly do that. I have to tell you, Cindy, I've seen it a few times and not once has it ever happened.
Yeah, I'm sure,
But you absolutely could. And that's something I wouldn't draw attention to in my offer. I would just mark the box and on, 111, 112 and see if they notice.
oh yeah. The same agent also requires no less than $5,000 earnest money.
Wow. This agent has obviously been screwed before. Her sellers have been before somehow burned. And so she's learning her lesson, and she's coming up with really great ways to better protect her sellers. You just have to be cautious when you have a buyer against her.
Yeah, but her listings are on the market far longer than a lot others too. So
that's probably something that needs to be weighed. Like, how many restrictions do you want to impose upon buyers, especially in this market?
right. Thank you.
Of course. So one little final one regarding kind of what's acceptable or reasons for rejection, maybe in this case. So we're just going to assume across the board an appraisal has not been done. It is not required to be done during the inspection period. Okay. There's nothing in the contract regarding a timeline for the appraisal, other than everything needs to be done in enough time to allow closing to occur on time. So that's kind of one of those things that they might bump up against. However, can a buyer cancel because they think they overpaid? Is that a valid reason for cancellation? Some of you are going to be shocked. I want to read you a little something, and then I want you to think about your response. So referencing due diligence, section 6A of the purchase contract. Buyer shall, during their inspection period, at their expense, conduct all of these investigations, inspections, evaluations, etc., to determine the value and condition of the premises. So if they determine through their investigations, evaluations, and inspections that the value of the home is not what they agreed to pay in the purchase contract, is that a valid reason for rejection and cancellation? I see some of you are responding, yes, 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 yes.
Sounds like it.
Yeah, I did my extra emphasis maybe change some people's minds on that. That's an often overlooked part of Section 6A and the contract itself. That yes, the fact that they don't believe the value is what they offered is a valid reason for rejection and cancellation.
So how would you write that up on the Binsr, that item disapproved is value is not what we thought it was?
Yep, value of the home. Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah,
And
again,
how-
you don't
and
have to get
how-
super creative.
I was going to ask Leah, and how do you prove that? Do you have to have your own appraisal done?
There's no proof required.
So
Like
you
this
can
is-
just,
Yeah, this is buyer's disapproval at buyer's sole discretion. So based on this, it really is, hey, you know, they ran numbers, they looked at other comps, they viewed other properties in the community, they looked at what it was going to cost to install X, Y, and Z in the home, and the value is just not there.
So technically, they don't have to get an appraisal.
No, they don't, not for that section.
Wow.
I mean, they have to get an appraisal at some point, right, to qualify for a loan, but to cancel
Right.
based on value, they do not need an appraisal for that purpose.
so now the buyers are the professionals, I guess.
Well, let's not go that far. But admittedly,
Yeah.
there have been times, right, where they find another property just came on the market substantially lower, or they found out in talking to their contractor that the kitchen remodel job to bring that home up to par is $15,000 over what they thought it was going to be. That's all value based, right? That ultimately the value for the home isn't there based on these other things that they have to do. I think somebody was saying something.
Yeah, you're telling me that this is all during the inspection period, is that correct?
Correct. Yes, this is all
Okay.
during that initial 10 days
Okay.
or 7 days or however many days. All right, so we're filling this all out. We know now, start with the verb, end with a citation for the reference to the inspection summary or the inspection report. And then they're going to go ahead and sign this line on page 2. So again, we reference that an addendum must be submitted to buyer's lender who may limit or restrict total contractual credits if they are accepting or they are requesting a monetary credit. So it's right there and highlighted for you all, but for your buyers to make sure that they are aware of that. This little section, buyer's waiver of inspections, this is only if they are waiving professional inspections. Okay, so a buyer may still kind of do their own inspections. We just discussed a whole bunch of ways for them to determine value, for example, that qualifies. However, if they don't hire a professional home inspector, they still need to make a selection on page 1. They need to accept, they need to reject, or they need to give seller the opportunity to do something. In this case, it would probably be a credit, but those 3 options still exist. So they still need to make a selection on page 1. They still need to sign this top line on page 2, but then they would also sign the waiver of inspections here at the bottom of page 2. So there wouldn't be a circumstance where they've signed that bottom waiver without having done something on page 1. So anytime you have that, just make sure they're doing both. And then the seller's response time. So again, I put the 5 days over here as a reminder that per the contract, 5 days is the standard. However, standard's not the right word. It's the preset. But you can modify that in the purchase contract if you want to shorten these timelines a little bit, which by the way, if you are closing in 15 days, you absolutely better be modifying your contract to modify the timeline for due diligence, or otherwise your due diligence period runs past close of escrow, which is a contract nightmare. So seller's response in big, bold letters, to be completed only if buyer provides seller an opportunity to correct or address items disapproved on pages 1 through 2. Again, we already referenced that, right? That once the buyer accepts or rejects the premises, the Binsr is done. So the seller only responds if repairs or a credit have been requested on page 1. If buyer provides seller an opportunity to correct or address items disapproved, seller shall respond within 5 days or otherwise specified days after delivery of this notice being the Binsr. Seller responds as follows. So again, we're all about choices. They have 3. Seller agrees to correct or address the items disapproved by buyer pursuant to terms set forth herein and Section 6J of the contract. Okay, so it's the workmanlike manner. It's making sure that you're hiring licensed contractors if necessary. And then it's based on what the buyer requested. So this is why it's so important as a buyer's agent to make sure that your repair requests are clear and concise. Again, disregard the narrative. We don't need to know how old the unit is and all of this, what the temperature was the day that they inspected. Get rid of all of that. Get to the point of what the actual repair is. A seller is unwilling or unable to correct or address any of the items disapproved by buyer, which in that case, of course, the buyer can then cancel. Seller's response to buyer's notice is as follows: attach an addendum if applicable. Again, then buyer would have the opportunity to cancel if they so choose. So if the seller marks the top box at this point, then the Binsr is done. So if seller agrees to correct or address all items disapproved, we're done. The buyer does not need to sign again on the bottom. However, if the seller marks either of those other 2, then they would need to sign something on the bottom. I put a $sign in here because I am a huge proponent of throwing money at it. What do I mean? I mean that regardless of what the buyer asked for on page 1, I always encourage my sellers to not make repairs unless legitimately I think it's something that might be necessary for financing purposes. If there's something that could get stuck in an appraisal as a condition that would need to be fixed in advance, like an active leak, or something that truly affects the current safety of the property, those types of things, yes, fix. But generally speaking, just throw money at it. If you just give the money to the buyer, they have to deal with all of this after closing. The seller doesn't have to worry about, is it done in a workmanlike manner? Did the contractor show up on time? Can I get it done and get receipts provided at least 3 days prior to close of escrow? Am I going to be on the hook if my contractor didn't do something correctly and now I'm getting a call 20 days after close of escrow or 4 months after close of escrow because the repair we made is somehow not working any longer? These are legitimate concerns, and it is so much easier. You avoid a lot of future problems by just throwing money at it. So even if you're having to give up a little more money than what the cost of the actual repairs would be if you made them, I promise you, seller, this is worth your peace of mind because you don't have any last minute issues, you don't have any potential pushback from the buyers, and you don't have any future liability. So with all that in mind, that's why the $sign is on there. So I know some agents like, oh no, they want to do this. It's easier, blah, blah, blah. It's easier now. You let me know how that works out when all of a sudden the buyers are complaining about how they fixed the brick wall at close of escrow. And now we're delayed in close and everybody has money on the line and time, and it's becoming a bigger problem. So that's my recommendation. And then, of course, the undersigned agrees to the modified or additional terms and conditions, if any, and acknowledges receipt of a copy thereof. If they are throwing money at it, and again, if there is a lender involved, then at that point, we would want an addendum to accompany this as well. Questions about seller's response?
Hi, Leah, it's Heather. I have a quick question.
Yeah.
A lot of times, even though it specifies, the workmanlike manner and $1,000, but on the request, sometimes on page 1, the buyer will say, please have a licensed roofer fix those 4 cracked tiles. Well, so then as a seller on this response, even though we know it says that it doesn't have to be done that way, do we have to kind of explain it out on this response when stuff like that is asked?
Yes, but let me tell you how I would do this in my true snarky fashion. So if we're agreeing to all of the repairs, this is the easiest route, right? You just mark the box. And that's really the only time that this would be problematic, because if we're not agreeing to all of the repairs anyway, then it's easy enough to spell it out. Oh, my alarm's telling me we have 5 minutes. Then it's easy enough to spell it out. However, the problem really arises when, but they are agreeing to it, they're just not going to hire a licensed roofer to come out to fix the 4 cracked roof tiles. So in a case like that, my recommendation is go ahead and mark that top box that seller agrees. And then in the lines below that, just say, pursuant to the contract, all repairs shall be made in a workmanlike manner.
Sounds good. Thank you.
So in essence, I'm not really giving them an out, but I'm reminding them of, hey, you already signed a contract to this effect, and you can't attempt to modify the contract through the Binsr. And if they really want a lengthy response, then I'll send them the article from AAR Legal Counsel explaining this better. Other questions about seller's response?
Hey, Leah, can you send us like a kind of a link for these articles? Because it's very beneficial for us.
Sure. If you the easiest way, because there's hundreds, if not thousands, on their website. So if you go to aaronline.com,
Yeah.
and then go to the risk management section, there is a legal Q&A segment where they, like I said, you can type in any keywords and it'll pull it all up. But I'll send the one specific to this. Yes. All right. One last thing. I have a YouTube video on this, so this is going to test your knowledge and how many of you are watching my YouTube channel. We get to the point where the seller has responded. The buyer does not like the seller's response. The buyer says, hey, if seller is willing to do this, then we would proceed. How do you modify the seller's response on the Binsr? Let me give you a hint. It is not a contract addendum. Ooh, all right. I'll send a link to my video for this then too. So there's only one way to do this, and this is not some ideal situation, FYI, but I think it's practical. I think you will have times where the buyer says, I'm okay with them saying no to these 4 things, but this one is a deal breaker for me. So if they will be willing to do that, then I will go ahead and proceed. The seller cannot modify their response because it has already been issued, meaning that they can't reissue the Binsr with a new response. Okay, that's a no. You don't want to purchase contract addendum because the addendum has to go to the lender and to the title company, and we don't want anything referencing repairs. And we wouldn't use an addendum because, again, the Binsr is not an addendum to the contract. An addendum is used to modify the contract, not modify a Binsr. So we don't want to confuse those two. So what you would do in that case is actually just draft a Word document. And the Word document would be labeled modification to seller's response on the Binsr. And then they would go ahead and just type in there what that change would be, and then have both parties sign it. That's it. Just use a Word document to modify the Binsr. That's your best course of action.
Hey, Leah.
Yeah.
I had it redone. That is a mistake, correct?
That is a mistake. Yeah, so very similarly to the one bite at the apple up front, once the Binsr is submitted, that part is done. So we would need to modify it in a different way. Now, practically and realistically speaking, I understand that the likelihood of a broker or anyone else knowing that this occurred, that in essence you already got the Binsr back, and then the seller modified that response and resent it, we really wouldn't. So the only time this would become a bigger issue is if there is arbitration or litigation after the fact, and now they're going to subpoena all of that information. They want to know what was first signed, when it was signed, how it was sent, where are your signing certificates. So again, I just like to be proactive about doing things correctly, and I don't want there to be any confusion. All right, the last section then is the buyer's election. And again, big, bold letters to be completed only if seller has not agreed to correct all items disapproved. Okay, if so, then they were done and the buyer doesn't need to sign anything below. But otherwise, they have 2 options. They elect to cancel this contract, or the buyer accepts seller's response to buyer's notice and agrees to close escrow without correction of those items seller has not agreed in writing to correct or address. So obviously, if they're modifying that response, you want that modification on the Word document prior to signing this election section, so that way you know what you're agreeing to move forward with, and you can go ahead and have that document signed off on as well. Then they'll both sign, and now the Binsr is done. So in most cases, I would say that it is that 3-part process: buyer first, seller response, buyer last. But there might be times where it stops at one of the other spots. Any other questions? Katya.
Hi, Leanne. Good morning. Can you use the
notice disclosure to add the items instead of a Word document for the Binsr or no?
I'm going to say no. And here's the reason I'm going to say no, because I would want the buyer to sign off on that as well, acknowledging receipt of that document separate. And the notice disclosure is a one-party notice form. So in that situation, only the seller would sign it. And I would prefer to have a form that both sign for acknowledgement. I mean, I guess you could have the buyer also sign just below the seller signatures on the notice disclosure, but then it also doesn't specifically reference what we're modifying. So I'm going to stick with a Word document. I might be convinced otherwise, but there would be other protocol to follow in that case.
Got it. Thank you.
You're welcome. Anyone else? Any other burning questions? All right. Well, thank you all for joining me this morning. Like I said, anybody who registered, I'll send out a copy of this video along with some helpful links and general information. And if you have any other questions, just reach out and let me know.
Thanks, Leah.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ryan.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Bye.
Leah.
Bye.